Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. I'm Nicola Winters, Head of International at Search Laboratory. And today's webinar is going to be on the top 5 international digital marketing fails. So very briefly, for those who aren't familiar with Search Laboratory, we're an integrated global digital marketing agency of around about 150 people. We're split between 2 offices, one in the UK and one over in the US. And I guess in practical terms, that means that we support clients in all stages of the online user journey, including things from SEO, paid media, programmatic advertising, social media and digital strategy. I guess what's unique about us as well is we're able to do that globally by having an in-house team of multilingual linguists as well. So a bit of housekeeping for you. This webinar should last around about 30 minutes. But if you do have any questions as we go along, please send them in via the chat box at the side of the screen, and we'll spend a few minutes at the end of the presentation just going through these and answering them. So a little bit more information about myself. I work from the UK office here in Leeds, and I directly manage the in-house team of mother tongue digital marketers. So we service clients in around 30 languages and in around 18 countries as well. Now, I remember when I first started working here that I thought that was such a unique setup, but to be honest, now I realise that it's absolutely essential to be able to service our clients correctly and strategically. So it's all about being proactive at understanding the cultural differences behind user behaviour, what their preferences are, what their expectations are online, and then any trends or events that could really drive revenue and sales for our clients. So for the purposes of this talk, I've separated the examples of mistakes or fails into 5 key areas for international expansion. So I'll be looking at the biggest mistakes brands tend to make within these, as well as ending with some tips and advice and some takeaways. So first, it's all about market entry. This is about being able to sorry, just skipped ahead a little bit there. But this is all about being able to identify the markets that present the biggest opportunities for your products or your services. Then we'll be looking at the localization of each website, but looking much further than simply translation or the language. Then we'll be moving on to SEO, but to be more precise, the technical SEOing of a site. So making sure that not just for users, but Google or search engines are able to read your content too. Then we'll be moving on to budget, which is arguably the most important, where we'll be looking at the problems associated with applying the same KPIs across all global sites. And then last but by no means least, we'll look at how to promote your website once you've launched in a new market in order to send positive brand signals to the search engines. So without further ado, we will start off with market entry. So in my role, we help lots of brands expand, mostly into Europe, and arguably this is where most of our time is spent. We do a lot of analysing, we do a lot of testing, and you can imagine that sometimes the sheer scale and size of this project tends to put a lot of companies off doing it. So a lot of people actually restrict themselves and don't expand globally. Others, I mean, it's very exciting times, they can get slightly carried away. Which brings us to our first fail, and that is trying too much at once. So the problem with doing this in bulk is that it can be extremely hard to ensure that all sites are technically, linguistically and culturally set up correctly for users. Not just users, but search engines need to be able to relate to this content in the right context. So we often see brands launching multiple international sites at the same time. Sometimes it might be in the same market, but simply in a different language. And they're investing a lot of time and effort and money into localized versions of all of these sites. And they're expecting similar results and fast. Now, without putting the right sort of budget to promote these websites, it doesn't necessarily mean that simply because you've built a website, the customers will come. And it can also be hard to track the performance of that market entry when you're tracking the performance at a global level rather than a country level. So choosing the most suitable domain for your overseas expansion is a vital first step in the path to international success. But this is something that a lot of people struggle with. And they can sometimes find that the subtle differences and the impact that the domain has on that business kind of confusing. So in terms of structuring your website, there's 3 main approaches that you could typically take, all of which have completely different cost implications and short and long-term benefits. So starting off with a CCTLD, which stands for a country code top-level domain. The second approach is a subfolder approach, and then the third being a subdomain approach. Now, as you can see from these examples here, Coca-Cola, Apple, and Wikipedia, there's actually no right or wrong answer. The decision should always be made on the amount of resource, your goals, and the time that you have available. So some of the advantages of the CCTLD that Coca-Cola are using is that this can have a real strong location signal to a search engine, and it has a higher degree of trust from a native user. And long-term, it has a real ranking potential. But of course, associated disadvantages with this is that the domain authority is completely self-contained, so it's going to take a lot of time and money and resource to build authority to that domain over time, and it's costly. So link authority would need to be built in from absolute scratch. Whereas with a subfolder, the advantage to that is that each subfolder benefits from link authority from that top-level domain, which means that it can be relatively cheap to set up multiple subfolders, and search engines already recognize the targeting associated with them. However, the disadvantages may be that users may not recognize that location signal quite as closely as a search engine, and so click-through rate might be affected. And also, the location is weaker than that of a CCTLD. Now, just to finish, a subdomain, which is something that Wikipedia are using at the minute, it kind of sits in between the other two in terms of pros and cons. It doesn't really have the full benefits of either, but similarly, it doesn't suffer from some of the restricted drawbacks that the others offer. So the decision about which domain structure to use should be made solely on resource, budget, and the original business objectives, an analysis of the industry as well and the landscape that you wish to enter. However, at the end of each section of this webinar, I'm hoping to end with a takeaway tip that you can start to implement almost immediately. So in order to give yourself the best chance of international dominance, take a detailed look at the markets that you wish to enter and fully analyse them before spending any serious budget. So we need to be looking into things like the user behaviour, the competitor strength, and overall interest in your products. So my tip for ensuring you have all the relevant data at your fingertips is actually to start by looking at your own site, your existing analytics of your main site. Now, it can be really dangerous to solely rely on third-party tools and data. So instead, start by asking yourself, where are you getting traffic and conversions from at the moment? Which countries are landing on your site? What is the conversion rate? These are the kind of metrics that can indicate an interest and desire to engage with your brand, despite there not being a localized version of your site. The next step is to conduct thorough competitor analysis and find out the markets that your competition is already profiting from. So SEMrush is my personal favorite tool to look at this, not just with a competitor analysis, but you can also analyze the search interest, which is absolutely essential. You need to find out where there's the most search traffic potential for your brand. And then lastly, and this one is really important, ensure that you conduct a SERP analysis to check who is appearing, particularly on page 1, who's dominating that space, who's competing on similar keywords, and what are their page metrics or domain metrics, because that competition may vary. There may be local competitors within that space. There might be different intent maybe behind the search terms. And all of this can be found using either SEMrush or even Mangle tools. They actually have a SERP checker that is absolutely free to use, but all of this can still be found in SEMrush. So step 2 is to generate more insight by essentially building out test landing pages. So depending on the nature of your business, you can use paid ads to then target users in that area. So by running the paid ad campaign, you collect the relevant data needed on that market behavior. Now, testing markets using this method means you are gathering as much insight and ultimately understanding your customers in that market before investing heavy amounts into localization projects. It can also help build the bones of a digital promotional strategy as well for future marketing efforts. So the team and I have helped lots of businesses expand their offering, particularly across Europe. And every experience and strategy is completely different, completely bespoke to the needs, goals, and resources of our clients at that time. And with Hootsuite, we built out fully localized campaigns for the European market. And we regularly reviewed and optimized this account, and we expanded keyword sets for absolutely each of the markets that we were targeting. So we started with just under 3,000 keywords and ultimately grew that to just below 7,000, which is around about 120% account growth. Now, the key thing to mention here is that 51% of conversions came from the keywords that we'd actually added over time. Not only does this allow us to make a much more informed decision on which markets are giving us the best ROI, but also it forms the foundations of our organic strategy. Understanding relevant keywords and longer tail phrasing can definitely direct your organic efforts moving forward. So moving on to localization now. To be honest, it wasn't that long ago that I used to refer to this part as the translation part. However, it's much more than simply looking at the copy on a page and directly translating content into a language. It's instead about delivering users an experience that makes them want to come back to your site again and again and again, which brings us to the second international marketing fail of today. Now, using automation within translation projects, it can be a very cost-effective way of doing it, but if done incorrectly, it can have such damaging effects. I mean, it can lead to a brand being unable to realistically compete in any market. It can lead to poor rankings, low click-through rate, low conversion rate, and ultimately damage the brand identity. So when translation and SEO are carried out separately, it goes through a kind of review process before the translation memory is updated. So the translation memory just helps to keep consistency in terms of messaging, terminology, as well as reduce costs on any repeated words in the future. So it's a really, really powerful tool. But the SEO optimizations, anything like page titles, the keyword usage, or any meta descriptions, headers, etc., they're all added to that page once the page is live. This means that if ever we want to make changes or update an existing page on that website, that means the non-optimized text in the translation memory is what ends up getting reused for consistency purposes. But that means that all the SEO changes that we've made for optimization in the past are completely lost. So the key thing to remember here is that SEO changes must be fed back into the memory. It can either be as part of the review loop or by feeding them back into the translation memory afterwards. So the key to success, I guess, for online visibility is when translation and SEO are done in a completely integrated way. So start with the keyword research. Then those target keywords can then be included in the page copy, and then the keyword optimized copy is added to the translation memory during the process and ready to reuse in the future. So I've just kind of talked about the ideal process when launching a site, and unfortunately it's often overlooked. And I can't count the amount of times I've been faced with a client who I have to tell them that hundreds of pages of their websites need re-optimizing before we can do any real promotion work. And that sometimes means we're undoing all the hard work that's already been undertaken by the translators who have delivered exactly what they were asked to deliver. So whether launching a brand new site or just looking to translate maybe a section of it, first put budget behind SEO. Start with the keyword research by SEO professionals as well. Ideally, these need to be from a mother tongue specialist, and apply all of this keyword research to page level as well, ultimately building out almost a site map for your translators. Once we have the keyword research, we can then start applying additional things like primary, secondary, and tertiary keywords for all of those pages, optimizing more than simply titles and URLs, but looking at headers, meta descriptions. And all of this informs the translators the type of audience they are creating each page for, where they are in the buying funnel, what they expect to find on the page, and much more, which of course speeds up the process. So use this as a type of glossary as well, and remember to build on it. Keep it for future launches as a bit of a starting point. I mean, alternatively, you could use it to build out content strategies for blogs or any content hubs that you hope to launch in the future. But by getting this right at the beginning, you're giving yourself the right sort of chance of building trust with the audience. and seeing a quicker return on that investment as well, because you're getting more people converting and revisiting your site, as well as saving time on translation and SEO in the long run. So when we work on full website translation projects, we always provide our clients with a market-ready website. So for MERLIN Cycles, we launched their website into Japanese, and we provided page-level keyword research, glossaries, data on the search and user intent. And then we use this data to build a localized PPC ad campaign that would target the head terms. So before the site was launched, we almost had a full promotion plan to the Japanese market, meaning that everything was market ready for its customers. So moving on to SEO, let's imagine that you've done all that work, spent all the time testing the markets and localized your site by native speakers. And then now it's about providing Google with the relevant information so that it can rank the correct pages and content in the right markets and languages. So hreflang is a HTML tag that you can add directly to the source code of a page, and it indicates to search engines the language of the content and also whether there are alternative versions for other languages or specific locations. So the main purpose is to help search engines understand the language of a piece of content so that it can serve it to those users. It's essentially a simple piece of code, but it's the one thing that developers keep getting wrong. And such a small error can have such a massive impact. So without the correct implementation of hreflang, search engines may just rank incorrect content for that market, or even worse, not rank any of it. Also, it can result in lower organic search visibility for the site. And I think more importantly, it can put you at risk of the Panda algorithm, which targets duplicate content. So hreflang is relevant in two scenarios. The first being where we have multiple pages that offer the same thing in the same language, but it's regional content. So here we have UK, Ireland, Australia, and the US. And we need to tell Google which page to deliver to a user depending on their location. The other scenario is where we have translated copy in different languages, so need to appear when people are searching from a particular location. So we need to provide Google with this information through the hreflang code. Now I just wanted to break this down for you a little bit. So this is how the code breaks down. We need to tell Google that there are alternative versions of this piece of content. We then give them the location of these alternative versions. Then we tell them the language of the content before finally saying which country location they are relevant for. So a common mistake that we see in this piece of code are actually misuses or errors within the ISO codes. So the ISO codes are used to tell search engines which country the page is targeting and which language the user needs the content to appear in. These codes need to be structured language first, then country. And mixing the order is a common mistake. To be honest, a lot of people can get confused between UK, GB, and EN. And as we can see on this example here, Europe is not recognized ISO region or country, so it cannot be targeted with hreflang. Another mistake is combining canonical and hreflang tags. So canonical tags are used to show a search engine which page should be indexed as the master page and which pages are alternative versions and should not be indexed. Whereas hreflang tags show which page is the main page but does not block the indexing of alternative pages. So multilingual sites need to ensure that they are using self-referential canonical tags when combining with hreflang. Once hreflang has been correctly set up, it's important that you have the right analytics to track the effect of this. So something that we commonly see is brands still tracking the traffic of the overall sites. However, the correct use of hreflang tags is likely to cause an initial drop in the overall site traffic, as users are actually sent to the correct localized versions of the relevant site. Instead, you need to be tracking things like the click-through rate, the conversion rate, and overall visibility and rankings. And what a difference it makes when it gets implemented correctly. So this example is taken from the fashion brand Outnet, and it shows us that their visibility was pretty steady. But we Our tech team here at Search Laboratory quickly identified that there were errors that had been made in the hreflang code, and it was causing US pages to rank in the UK and vice versa. So once this was fixed, as you can see, visibility dramatically increased and then remained pretty stable, meaning more relevant customers and profit. So a little bonus tip for you here. It's important to place the hreflang code as close to the head of the page as possible, just so that the search engine bots are able to read and crawl the link as early as possible as well. If putting the tags first things isn't something that's that feasible, then avoid placing them under complex scripts that take time to load. So this example on the screen here was one taken from one of our clients. And when we actually removed the script, then Google was able to see those hreflang tags and display to users accordingly. So moving on to spend now, this is all about the way that your budget is distributed across markets on a digital scale. Now, unfortunately, this is slightly related to the market entry fail about trying too much at once, but what we see all too often is companies spending a little bit here and a little bit there, and yet they have massive teams behind their parent site, whether that be the UK or the US. So spreading budget too thinly is the fourth fail on the list today. And not performing gap analysis at market level means you end up sort of applying the same KPIs across all sites and ultimately tracking overall performance. So here's the problem with applying the same KPIs globally. It can be much cheaper to retarget customers if you already know or have an existing customer base. Yet in new markets, to establish brand awareness and trust, that takes time, resource, and budget. But when done correctly, the rewards can be huge. So it's important to research the market thoroughly and take advantage of its uniqueness. For example, do they use different search engines? How do they work? What are the key events and dates that really drive sales? Because believe it or not, Black Friday is not popular everywhere. What are the e-commerce platforms and marketplaces? And is there an opportunity there for us to maybe work with them? So take Amazon, for example, the biggest marketplace in the UK at the moment. They have almost 40 million unique UK visitors per month. And some stats on here show that 92% of people who start on Amazon eventually buy on Amazon. So it needs to be something that can't be ignored. When looking at that on a global scale, the popularity varies massively. So although Amazon is still dominant in India, Flipkart, a competitor of theirs, continues to hold the market share. And as we can see in China, Amazon is nowhere to be seen. Now, actually, Amazon did invest in Chinese expansion a few years ago, and they ended up being a bit of a small player in the market. And that's because Alibaba and lately more JD.com controls more than 80% of the Chinese e-commerce market. So Amazon re-entered around 2 years later as a seller on Tmall, which is quite the unthinkable of the Amazon giant that we know here in the UK. But actually what Amazon have ended up doing is exploiting a gap that the Chinese market had. And now Amazon has an opportunity to provide cross-border e-commerce for customers using merchants from the US, from the UK, and from Japanese marketplaces. So a bit of an obvious one here, but it's all about exploiting the gaps competitors and markets are leaving. So as mentioned before, take time to really understand the algorithm of the different search engines if that's applicable to the market you're entering. So take a look at these two examples here. Yandex, which is the biggest search engine in Russia, it took links out of its algorithm back in 2015, only to then later, about a year later, decide to put them back in again. The algorithm doesn't mind too much about domain structure, and it will rank .coms no problem. And we know through our experience at Search Laboratory that it's actually not unusual for Russians to buy from English sites, and the conversion rates can be quite high. Whereas with Baidu, the search engine used in mainland China for simplified Chinese uses a completely different set of criteria. So just looking at Baidu in isolation, if you look at the SERPs, 80% of the SERP is dominated by ads. So we know from our experience as well that Chinese people trust ads as well. It's seen as marketing done well. And for that reason, it means that the click-through rate for any organic listings remains incredibly low. So it's important to understand where your customers are other than the search engines. How do they consume their news? How do they engage with brands? Now, we should all be familiar with the social media icons here, but how familiar are we with WeChat? Because this is the social media platform used in China, and it has a feature called WePay that is used by 80% of the population for online purchases. So, moving on to brand promotion, when looking at your international domain, it's vital to build on the awareness of your brand. So despite using marketplaces for sales or paid advertising, Google in particular needs to see a constant influx of positive brand signals so that it can rank you accordingly. In a digital world, one of the easiest ways to measure brand awareness is through your search visibility. For example, do you appear for those relevant terms? Which brings us on to the final fail, assuming brand awareness. Just because you're receiving conversions from a market or were pleasantly surprised by an initial paid advertising campaign, this doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to receive those similar results on an organic scale. And I guess the question is, why would you want to continue paying for your traffic? So I remember a while ago there was a headline about the Google's Vince update, and it was producing big brand rankings. And there was a headline that said Google calls it a trust change. Now, I want to just make it apparent that this was back in 2009. This is nothing new. And in fact, the concept of brand has been spoken about in the SEO community for about 10 years now. Just looking at Google guidelines, the word trust is mentioned 69 times in the Rater Guidelines document. So we know that big brands ooze trust signals, and this means that we work with our clients on things like content marketing, digital PR, on-site content, and working with influencers so that we can generate things like lots of high-quality links, online mentions, press coverage, social media followings, and also try and get some strong branded search volume as well. It might even be little things like on-site documentation to do with your privacy policy, terms and conditions, cookie policy, etc. So there's no real tip for this actually. The decision needs to be completely bespoke for each brand, dependent on the industry that you're operating in. But here at Search Laboratory, we've created an extensive list of actions for brands to take. So this could either be when you're entering a new market or simply migrating from one site to another. But these are all the things that help Google to understand how trustworthy a source is by ensuring a constant flow of these positive signals. So these signals tend to be associated with EAT, which is expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. So these are broken down into sections that can be implemented site-wide, on product or category pages, and then more about the creative, informative content hubs such as blogs, etc. So I'm working on promotional content, excuse the Star Wars, but we have to be quite creative, and we helped a stationery and office supply client. We looked at their product post-it note and cue Star Wars. We ended up creating murals, videos of Star Wars characters and everything, created press releases, created blueprints, images, photography, and as well as increase the rankings, some significant. So for example, in the UK, we were already on page 1 for post-it notes. But as you can see, we were up against the likes of postitnotes.com, Amazon, and the works. And yet after this campaign, we'd actually jumped to position 4 above the likes of Amazon and the works, which is huge in terms of revenue and traffic. But I think the key thing to mention here is we generated lots of high quality links, online mentions, press coverage, and there was a strong branded search volume. People started searching for Viking post-it notes. Another key thing here is we chose where we promoted it. We left out the markets that we knew would not see a return. So just as a little bit of a summary then, we looked at these 5 areas. So looking at market entry, make sure to build out test landing pages and use paid ads to test markets before investing in any serious localization projects. When it comes to localization, ensure that you conduct thorough keyword research by mother tongue specialists and apply that to page level before spending on translation. With SEO, make sure to implement hreflang, which is a HTML tag in the head section of a page's source code. And this helps Google to serve the correct content to users, and that is based on their language and or location. With spend, make sure that to perform gap analysis in each market, applying specific KPIs to campaigns. And then with brand promotion, just improve your EAT rating by ensuring a constant influx of positive signals associated with things like expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. If you do have any questions, then please let me know. I've had a few questions already that have just come in, so I'm just going to answer these. The first question is, I'm already in the process of translating my site. Is it too late to think of SEO now? Absolutely not. As I sort of mentioned in the localization section of this presentation, it's all about applying SEO in a review loop. So as long as the optimized copy is going back into that translation memory to be used in the future, then no, it's not too late. I think a lot of good sort of SEO professionals have found a way to integrate with the translation workflow as well. And there's a lot of tools and databases that allow us to do that with other agencies quite easily. So no, it's definitely not too late to think about SEO. Another question here is, are there any tools that you would recommend using to decide on which market is the best to enter next? Yes, to be honest, there's lots of tools, and I'm always going to come back to sort of SEMrush. Google also offers Global Market Finder, which is a free tool. You put your existing site in and it automatically populates the categories that it believes that you have on offer. You can add other categories if you feel that that is necessary. And it will spill out the markets based on the disposable income of those people, the online population, the cost per click, things like that. Yes, it's a good starting point, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to create your own data, do your own testing, look at your own analytics first, and only kind of use those other third-party tools as a guide. So I have another question here. Do you have any insight into the channels that would work best internationally? So it was about when I mentioned PPC being really important in China. Is paid social more effective in some markets, i.e. the Middle East? Yes, because user behavior, as I mentioned online, varies massively. And where people are active, whether that is the social media platforms, how they can consume news, varies massively. So in the Middle East, generating sort of creative PR campaigns like the Star Wars wouldn't necessarily have worked as well. So within China, yes, we tend to use more of a paid strategy than organic, whereas when we're working with European markets, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on our organic promotional efforts, because we know that users will engage with brands and have more sort of trust signals. I'm more than happy to get back to any sort of individuals if it's about a specific market after this webinar, because I'm aware I'm sort of running out of time a little bit, but I will definitely get back to individuals about specific markets in the future. If there's nothing else, thank you again for listening. I've been Nicola Winters, and yes, I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.